Okay, we're ready to go. Good morning. 3 years ago, we joined with our colleagues and the members of the 9/11 Commission to issue a series of bipartisan recommendations to make our country safer and more secure against terrorist attack. 2 years ago, the 10 of us issued a letter grade report. We concluded this country at that point was not safe enough. Today, Lee Hamilton and I are revisiting these recommendations. What we say today is the two of us. We have not had a chance to communicate with every one of the commissioners. We don't have the same staffs as what we once had, so this really is from Lee and myself. It's our belief that we have made some progress, but that we have still a very long way to go. We have made progress at home in our ability to detect, prevent, and respond to terrorist attacks. It's been difficult, incomplete, and it's been very slow, but real progress has been made. The Director of National Intelligence is beginning to forge a unity of effort. The National Counterterrorism Center is forcing greater sharing of intelligence. The CIA's collection and analysis of intelligence is improving. The FBI is creating a domestic intelligence capability. The Terrorist Screening Center checks the manifest of every international flight planning to enter the United States. Airport screeners are better trained, and states and localities are implementing the Incident Command System. Now, we can take every one of these areas and tell you the shortcomings, how far we still have to go. But also, it's the case that our defenses are certainly better than they were. On the international front, the record, frankly, is of far greater concern. 6 years after 9/11, a national intelligence estimate speaks of a persistent and evolving terrorist threat to the United States. Inside Pakistan, al-Qaeda has protected or regenerated key elements of its homeland attack capacity. And that's, again, the same national intelligence estimate. We know that inside Afghanistan, according to President Hamid Karzai, the security situation over the past 2 years has definitely deteriorated. We are not succeeding in enlisting the energies and sympathies of the world's 1.3 billion Muslims against the Islamic extremist threat. The long-term threat to our security is as great as ever. The enduring threat is young Muslims without jobs and without hope, who are angry with their own governments, and who perceive America as the enemy of not just them, but of Islam. Poll after poll points at the low standings of the United States among the countries in the Muslim world. In Sunday's Washington Post, we spelled out in some detail what we believe the United States needs to do. Military power is necessary. We need to strike at terrorist sanctuaries if others will not. We also need the tools of national power to protect us in order to shape a Muslim world that is less hostile to our interests and values. We need to do a number of things. First of all, we need diplomacy. Second, we need foreign aid and educational assistance. And third, we need a vigorous public diplomacy that emphasizes scholarship, libraries, and exchange programs. We can best protect our long-term security if the Muslim world views us not as a threat, but as a source of opportunity and of hope. Lee?
Good morning. Before we turn to your questions, Tom and I would like to make 3 additional points. First relates to the question of priorities. We do not think that our government has done a good job deciding what it is we need to protect and what kind of threats are most likely and what kind of threats are least likely. By way of illustration, we have volumes of infrastructure protection plans. The list of potential targets is very long. The dollars get spread around to cover them because nobody wants to be wrong. We now have a new law with a better formula for distributing federal grants on the basis of risk and vulnerability. The challenge for states and localities is to identify the true risks, and the challenge for the federal government is to make the hard choices on the distribution of scarce dollars. It's the toughest problem in many respects for Homeland Security, the establishment of priorities. The second point we make relates to congressional oversight. We said 3 years ago that strengthening congressional oversight of counterterrorism was among the most difficult and important of our recommendations. So far, we've seen not very much progress. Congress has been responsive to many of the 9/11 Commission's recommendations. By our arithmetic, about 80% of the Commission's recommendations have been adopted in whole or in part. Good reforms by the Congress in the new law include a strengthening of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and the declassification of the intelligence budget. Because the intelligence budget no longer has to be hidden, there is now a major opportunity to improve congressional oversight. The annual appropriation for intelligence can now be the exclusive focus of review by a single committee in the Congress, single committee in each House. We believe both the House and the Senate should adopt such a reform promptly. The third point we make, and final point, is simply relates to the threat, the general threat. We think that threat is real. There's absolutely no doubt about the intent of the terrorists, and they are surely working on their capabilities. Al-Qaeda is continuing to try to acquire weapons of mass destruction and will not hesitate to use them if they get them. We still need a maximum effort to secure the world's loose nuclear materials. Tom and I believe that the terrorists will try to strike the United States again. Unfortunately, the passage of time has left us distracted and complacent. The threat has not diminished. Our sense of urgency has diminished. We call on our elected leaders, as well as the candidates for president, to spell out how they plan to address the continuing threat. While we have made progress these past 6 years, as Tom said in the opening comments, we still have a long way to go. We'd be pleased to respond to your questions. We'll do that from the chairs.
Would you, when called on, will you just give your name and affiliation? Mike, please. Good night.
Carol Craddy with CNN. When you talk about the problems with winning the war of minds with Muslims overseas, can you go over some of the things that you feel the U.S. is doing that are at odds, whether it's Iraq and some of the other issues?
The kind of things we need to do? Or? The problems, yeah. Well, the problem is every time you see a poll in any Muslim country, they still like us. They like our values. But they think our policies are not only against their own particular country, but even against Islam in some cases. And we've got to change that. And the way you change that is to use some of the same strategies, I believe, that we used at the end of the Cold War. We've got to have educational exchanges. We've got to have cultural exchanges. We've got to have more students here, not less. We think we've got to close Guantanamo, which remains a terrible black eye to the United States and the Muslim world, and we think we've got to redouble our efforts for peace in Israel, because in the Muslim mind, we are continually ignoring the fate of the Palestinians. And that's something Muslim people care very, very seriously about, and I think we should care about it too, and I don't think we do. And so the Israeli peace process is something also that I think we've got to concentrate on. Lee?
Yeah, let me just add that I think so often when we talk about the war on terror, we think of defeating immediately Osama Bin Laden, the other leaders of al-Qaeda, and if we can wipe them out, then we've solved the problem of terrorism. I think what Tom and I are stressing here is that, as others have said, the war on terror is a generational problem. And it's going to be with us long after the particular leaders of al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations are eliminated. The long-term, the durable threat is the radical Islamic young people. And if you're going to win the war on ideas, and if you're going to win the war on terror, then you're going to have to deal with these hundreds of millions of Muslims across the world. Now, let me be very clear here. We think almost all Muslims are very, very good people, but there is a group of radical Muslims that we have to aim at. And that radicalization of Islam is a very disturbing phenomenon, which is a huge challenge to American foreign policy now. And in addition to what Tom said, I think American foreign policy has to convey to Islam that we want to help Muslims achieve a better life. We can't do it for them. Their governments are principally responsible, but we ought to be on their side in their effort to achieve a decent life and to provide for them hope and opportunity. If we continue to have this remarkable alienation in the Arab world against us, for the reasons Tom has set out, then we have a war on terror that is going to go on for many, many generations.
Yeah, could I just say one more thing just to illustrate what Lee and I are talking about? As you all know, the largest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. And polls were taken there as other places and showed that 60 to 80% of the people in that country didn't like the United States and their policies. Then came the tsunami. And the front pages of the papers had pictures of American troops delivering aid, delivering food, delivering health care, and all of that. And then, of course, President Clinton, former President Bush came and all of that. They took another poll after that. 60% of the people in that country then had a favorable opinion of the United States. That's a lot cheaper than war.
Other questions?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Please wait for the mic.
Thanks. My name's Colin Darner. I'm from ABC News. You talked a little bit about the 2008 presidential candidates. Last week, Fred Thompson called Osama Bin Laden nothing more than a symbol. What do you think about that?
I think he's a very important symbol. I would agree with that. My own personal view is that the leadership of al-Qaeda is shifting to others now. Zawahiri is the principal deputy, I think. But I don't think there's any doubt that Osama bin Laden is still the symbol for all of us of al-Qaeda. I think it is still hugely important for the United States to try to eliminate Osama bin Laden. I do not think he is the operational head today of much of the terrorist activity that's taking place in Europe and other places. but he is certainly a major symbol, and I think the United States should not spare any effort to try to get him. And we recommend in here, among other places, that these sanctuaries have to be eliminated. If there's any lesson we have learned from the strikes on 9/11 6 years ago, it is that you cannot permit Al-Qaeda to have sanctuaries, as they did in Afghanistan, and therefore we think they should be eliminated. Now, it would be far preferable if Pakistan eliminated them, but if they don't, we should.
Hi, Laura E. I'm a freelance for New Hampshire Public Radio. What do you see as the highest priority in terms of what needs to be done as quickly as possible that has yet to be done? And in terms of the Iraq War, to sort of build on the CNN report, I've asked for a more specific reaction. If a lot of Muslims are upset about the U.S. because of the Iraq War, then what are the policy options at this point? We're having this major debate about what to do about having a withdrawal date for the Iraq War. Would that make any difference if Congress were to pass one, that it would improve the U.S. image?
Well, I'll mention one priority. It may not be the most likely event, but it's certainly the scariest, and that is a terrorist in possession of a nuclear weapon inside the borders of the United States. Now, we know that it's not hard to build these weapons, particularly a dirty bomb. You can find out how on the internet if you want to. We also know, unfortunately, it's not as hard as it ought to be to get across the United States borders. So if we're going to prevent this, the best way to do it is stop them from getting a hold of the materials. Now, we've had some programs to do that over the years, Nunn-Lugar most particularly, but we've lessened funding this year, cut funding for that program, not increased it. And to me, because of the potential damage to people, to the United States economy, to everything else, that is something we've got to redouble our efforts. We think the president should be knocking heads right now to make sure that's the top priority, is just doing whatever is necessary to prevent a potential terrorist getting a hold of a nuclear device. As far as Iraq, Lee, do you want to?
Well, Tom and I have been in accord on that since the beginning. Look, we lost 3,000 people 6 years ago. Just reflect for a moment on the changes that have come about in your lifestyle and mine, the amount of money that we have spent, the programs we have enacted, the departments of government that have been restructured, and the impact on the sense of well-being of all of us because we lost 3,000 people. Now, the estimate we had, I think, Tom, was that if you had a nuclear bomb go off in Manhattan, 500,000 people would be killed, and casualties would be much, much greater. The impact of that is absolutely unfathomable. We just cannot imagine what the impact of that would be on the United States in every aspect of our life. So this threat is in a class by itself. There is nothing that comes anywhere near close to this threat. And therefore, it should be the absolute priority. Why have we not, 6 years after 9/11, developed a detection device for nuclear materials? Now, it's a very frustrating matter. A lot of money has been put into it and a lot of effort made, but we have not done it. We have to do that. To go beyond the question a little bit, I would say beyond this WMD threat, in general, my priority is still to try to infuse in the government a sense of urgency at all levels, local and state, as well as federal. My impression is you've got an awful lot of very good, able people working on homeland security and counterterrorism. They're doing the very best they can, but I do not think that overall you really have a sense of priority, of urgency to overcome the complacency that is now prevalent in this country. And that's a task of political leadership, I believe.
You had a second part of your question on Iraq.
Well, I wanted you to answer that, Tom.
No, I was hey, we've got the most distinguished leader of the best study commission that's done anything about Iraq sitting next to me here.
We're not here to get deeply into Iraq policy. There are other forums for that in the city today. But I do think we agree that Iraq has been a powerful recruiting tool for terrorists and therefore has a much longer term fuse to it than might otherwise be the case, so that those being trained in Iraq today will be aiming at other targets long after the Iraqi war is resolved, as we hope it all will be fairly soon. And I think that's the principal point we want to make here with regard to Iraq, the importance of trying to, of recognizing the recruiting and training tool that Iraq is on terrorism.
Anyone else from the media have any questions? No? Yes, ma'am? Hi. Stay back there.
I think this is Sylvia Smith with the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. This is probably really simplistic question, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. When you say that weapons of mass destruction is by far the biggest problem and that there is simply a lack of political leadership, it's so obvious when you and others describe what the problem is, and then it's so difficult to figure out why everybody in government doesn't share that view. Why is that? What should we tell our readers about why their elected leaders are fiddling, I guess is how you might describe it?
Well, it's frustrating to me because our leaders from the president on down have said from time to time there is no more important problem, and that it is the leading problem we have to deal with. And then the frustration comes, of course, it's not moving as fast as it should. We estimated, I think, that it should take, was it 3 or 5 years to really put the caps on the areas where the nuclear materials exist, so that terrorists couldn't get in through rusty fences or lack of guards or whatever. We've been estimated it's going to take us 15 years to do that. It's unacceptable. We don't have 15 years, and particularly so when the leaders of Al-Qaeda have been so explicit in saying they want to attack us with nuclear weapons. Osama Bin Laden on down have said they want to do this. So we know what their motivation is. We know they've tried to get nuclear materials in the past. And so why isn't there a greater sense of urgency? I think maybe because it's difficult. And maybe once you say it, it's hard to galvanize the American public in that regard. But it simply has got to be, we think, even if it's not the most lightly attack, it is certainly the most serious, and therefore should have our fullest attention at a policy level at all levels.
Well, the inbox is always full for an incumbent political office holder, and there are many, many things pressing you. There are a lot of lobbyists around this town pressing you every time you walk out of the door on some issue in the Congress, and a lot of people have important interests to try to convey to their legislators. I don't know very many people lobbying legislators today about the WMD threat, and politicians tend to respond to where the constituent pressure is. So it's understandable in a way that they don't act on this just because they live very hurried lives and busy lives. What we're saying is, hold on here, let's take a step back, put your feet up on the desk and look out the window for a few minutes and ask yourself what really is important in counterterrorism. And I don't know anybody that would disagree with us. What Tom said earlier is right. We think the president needs a special person who is in charge of this issue. What you have today in the United States government is a whole lot of good people at the DOD, at the DOE, at the FBI, at the DHS, and half a dozen other agencies looking at this problem, working on some aspect of it. But nobody is putting it all together, and nobody is able to knock heads together to get things done. And that's what you have to have. And the only place where you can knock heads together in the United States government, there's only one place, and that's the White House.
Gentleman over here. Thank you.
Chris Strom with Congress Daily. There's obviously a tension between having security and privacy and civil rights and constitutional protections. Can you comment on where you think the balance is now? Has it swung too much to the security side? We've seen court rulings with national security letters being struck down, with the FISA law being amended now. Specifically, where do you think the FISA debate should go, and where do you see the balance between security and civil liberties?
Well, it is certainly worrisome because it seems to us the civil liberties side has not had the voice that's necessary in this debate up to this point. We recommended, very strongly a Civil Liberties Board, but that Civil Liberties Board has not been very active. Now, Congress has, in the latest legislation, redesigned the Civil Liberties Board to give it more power, to give it Congress has now got to give their approval to nominees. It's got to be bipartisan. It's been given more tools and more powers. So we hope a reconstituted Civil Liberties Board is going to raise some of the questions that need to be raised in this problem. But I think we got to look at the way we're detaining people around the world, what impact any of these proposals have on civil liberties, and then we can have the debate. And if we want to say, all right, in this atmosphere, we'll give up this and that, that's okay, but it ought to be the debate. That ought to be what we're talking about.
The lady up here.
Well,
Lee,
let me just add a word on the civil liberties question. If you look back over the last 6 years, these people who argue the security side of the equation have won most all the debates. And that's probably understandable, too, because we genuinely have a security problem on terrorist attacks. I think what has begun to happen is in the Congress and in the courts, you're getting some real pushback now on the question of civil liberties, and Tom and I both think that's a favorable development. At the DHS, at the FBI, at the DOD, at the White House, wherever, proposals come up to make us more secure, and they should come up, and you want people to try to advance them. But somebody has to be watching it and saying, how does this proposal impact the civil liberties and the privacy of Americans? And they have to push hard on that question. If they don't, then the privacy and the civil liberties that most of us value will be eroded. You've got to have some pushback from the civil liberties side here. That's what this Civil Liberties Board is supposed to do. And we hope and think it ought to be very robust within the administration, within the Congress, and cutting across all departments and agencies of government.
The difficulty is that in the past, in wartime, we've always given up some of our civil liberties. I mean, I'd have liked it afterwards, but Lincoln abolished habeas corpus, Franklin Roosevelt imprisoned Japanese Americans. I mean, things we don't approve of now, but they did in wartime. But then the war was over, and 3 or 4 years later, everything was restored. How long is this going to go on? We talk about our children and grandchildren having this problem. Well, we cannot just let our civil liberties go for that period of time. We've got to establish a framework And that's what we haven't done yet. And that's we hope the Civil Liberties Board is going to be a very important part of establishing that framework.
I want to recognize that these questions are tough. These surveillance questions are very, very difficult. And it is true, as those who have advocated more security have said, that we're in a very unique time, and you do have to look very carefully at different surveillance tools and how to deal with the terrorist threat. Detentions, torture, and a lot of other questions that arise here are not easy questions. But what is important, it seems to me, is that you have some more balance in this debate and discussion. And that's what we want that Civil Liberties Board to do.
Hi, Colby Ekowitz with Congressional Quarterly. The 9/11 Commission had recommended more streamlining congressional oversight, and it's one of the recommendations that wasn't brought into law. Could you speak a little bit to that? And do you think that Congress can get things done without streamlining congressional oversight?
Would we say what?
Do you think it's possible for Congress to get things done and to be proactive without adhering to this recommendation of streamlining congressional oversight?
I think there's a lot of good intent on the Hill on this question. You have to recognize that overseeing the intelligence community is a difficult task. It cannot be done by the press. You don't have access to the information. Cannot be done by ordinary Americans. They don't have access to the information. Oversight of the intelligence community has to be done by the Congress. Independent oversight. There is no other source of independent oversight of the intelligence community than the Congress. Thus, the Congress's oversight is hugely important. If I have heard the argument once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Trust me. It comes from good people. But Ronald Reagan had the right approach here. Trust but verify. And I think you have to have very, very robust oversight. Now, we haven't had it. And the reason you haven't had it is because the committees of the Congress that give the money to the intelligence community are overwhelmed with other responsibilities. The Defense Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee oversees a defense budget that, for a round figure, is somewhere around $500 billion a year. And it includes fighting a war in Afghanistan and a war in Iraq, taking care of the veterans, and all kind weapons systems for the next 10 years, and thousands of other issues. They are charged with the responsibility of overseeing a very, very large intelligence budget. The figure's been often published, but I think I'm not supposed to use it publicly. But it's tens of billions of dollars. They spend very little time on it. And when I say very little, I mean appallingly little. So that the way things are set up now, some improvement in the House, but marginal. There is no one working in the Congress full-time with staff and all of the rest on the question of oversight of the intelligence community. And I think it is a huge weakness in the system.
Look, ask you members of the press, how is the CIA doing? I mean, the CIA is absolutely essential as our eyes and ears in uncovering these plots. We found out that they failed totally before 9/11. They also failed in lead up to Iraq. But there's supposed to be a great number of reforms at the CIA. Are they happening? Are they being carried out? We found out that, 8%? 8% only of the people they hired last year had the language skills and the capabilities that they were looking for. Only 8%. We know that. But how are they doing in the other? We don't know. We have no idea. And so if the Congress isn't concentrating on that, if the Congress isn't looking at how the CIA is proceeding, nobody will. And that is our first line of defense. And we can't just allow it to nobody pay any attention to it. So if Congress's oversight is, and I'll use a senator's own words, dysfunctional, then we're going to suffer. It's going to be very serious. And look at Homeland Security. They report to 86 different committees. Now, does anybody think that's possible to have oversight when you report to 86 different committees, in addition to wasting an enormous amount of time from that agency who should be spending the time protecting us? So
let me make another point about this oversight. It's been much on my mind. Every time I pick up a paper to read an article on intelligence today, it involves surveillance. It involves data mining. It involves technology, in other words. Okay. I chaired the Intelligence Committee 20 or 30 years ago. At that time, we said the number one intelligence problem was that we had too much faith in technology and not enough confidence in human spies on the ground. If you ask people today, what's our principal weakness in intelligence, they'll say our human intelligence is not strong enough, is not good enough. I don't really know how effective the CIA is today in training spies. But I know that over 30 or 40 years, we have had an enormous problem in this country in training, recruiting, and sustaining spies on the ground. And if you go today and ask the question, how many spies on the ground do we have in North Korea? How many spies on the ground do we have in Iran? And a dozen other places in the country. They won't answer the question, of course. But my sense is that it hasn't much improved. Now, that's what I mean by oversight. The Congress has to ask the tough questions about our ability to retrain, to train, to recruit, to sustain spies on the ground. And my general sense is, just to give you an illustration of what we mean by oversight, is we're still hung up on technology. And we think technology is going to answer all our questions. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not against technology. You got to do that. But there's a human element that is absolutely necessary in any intelligence agency.
Yes,
ma'am. This is Marwa Karim, Al Hurra TV. You've stated that there has been some progress concerning war on terrorism. After Bin Laden issuing 2 tapes, how do you estimate the efforts of the American administration concerning that after 6 years of the 9/11 attacks?
In the war on terror?
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of effort has been expended, a lot of good people working on it, a huge amount of money has been spent, and I think we are safer today than we were 6 years ago. And we've said that repeatedly. And you must always keep in mind that we have not had an attack in this country since 9/11. That's very good news. And it certainly means we're doing some things right. There may be an element of luck there, we don't know. But we've done a lot of things right, I think. So I assess it positively, all of this effort that has been made to make us safer. But we also see there are a lot of problems still remaining. There are a lot of vulnerabilities. There are a lot of gaps in our system that we think should be strengthened to make the American people safer than they are today. Okay.
name is David Zenley. I'm with Congress Now. Getting back a bit to Congress, you've discussed how major problem is oversight. Do you think there's anything more that needs to happen at the legislation level to make further changes? Because they have passed a lot of legislation, creating a director of intelligence, national standards for driver's license. Is it really a matter of just follow through, or is there something that needs to happen more at creating laws to make progress here?
I don't think of it so much in terms of new legislation. I think it's an institutional matter, reorganization, restructuring, and providing the newly formed committees to have exclusive jurisdiction over the intelligence community, and then to make sure those committees are adequately staffed with a lot of professional help.
But you do need some resources and need some follow-through. I mean, you mentioned driver's licenses. Okay. Congress passed legislation, but they didn't put any dollars behind it. So there are a lot of, in my state, I went to get a new driver's license, and it's very fancy with holograms all over it, and I had to pull 3 different kinds to not only have my passport and my driver's license, I'd give another third form of identification. I mean, it's very good. But not many states have done that thorough a job. And a lot of states haven't done much at all because there hasn't been any funding followed through from the federal government. And if we're going to use the driver's license as a standard form of identification, for instance, get across the Canadian border, then we better have some uniform standards for how we develop driver's licenses. And the Congress is, I don't think, going to see their law followed through in the various states unless they follow it with a little funding to help the states do it. That's the kind of thing where we need to really, there's a number of those kind of areas where we've got the laws in the books, but the follow-up just hasn't been there yet.
One more. Anyone who hasn't asked them yet? All right. We'll end with you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for taking a second question. I wanted to ask about the visa waiver program. The DHS has not toughened up the visa waiver program. Is that not a big...
What program?
The visa waiver program.
Oh, the visa waiver program?
The Department of Homeland Security has still not toughened up their stance. Is that not a big vulnerability for our country?
I think it is a big vulnerability, and I don't know that it's all worked out yet. We've got this Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, which is part of it, I think, and that requires secure documents, a passport or its equivalent, and I think that we have certainly tried to support in the Commission recommendations better documentation. The waiver program presents a lot of very delicate political problems for us that I know our diplomats have been working on very, very hard. And we have the U.S. visit program that I think there's been some improvement there. But overall, my impression with regard to the waiver program is that we've got a lot of work to do with our allies in working it out. Tom?
Yeah, again, it was toughened up a lot in that 2007 statute that was passed. The question now is implementation. And here again, Congress has got to make sure the state, they can't just pass laws, because they've passed a lot of laws that have never been implemented or aren't implemented very well. There's got to be follow through here. And that's particularly true, I think, of the visa waiver program.
I think one of the most significant improvements that is being made is this change from the 2 fingerprint to the 10 fingerprint procedure. 2 is now in place in most of our ports of entry. We're beginning to make the transition to 10 fingerprints. When that is done, I believe we will have a much, much more secure border because of the additional information you can get. If the investigators go into a scene and seek fingerprints, what often happens is that they will pick up 1 or 2 fingerprints, but not necessarily the fingerprints if you're only using the 2-digit system. If you're using 10, you can have a much better chance of identifying the terrorists. So it's a very large improvement in the identification and will give us greater protection. Okay.
Thank you.
I got it.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.